business management. Since I graduated, I was always happy to look for new opportunities, and during the COVID, there wasn't many industries where I could work. So I was happy to try out the construction industry. I personally haven't experienced it. However, I could see it from the atmosphere. And some people prefer to stick to their own ethnic group and not outside. And I found it sometimes difficult to speak to them. I wasn't sure whether it was only the language or not, but as an industry that encourages diversity and inclusion, health and safety is really important to communicate with one another. But that was a barrier. I won't be able to say it's exactly race, but I wouldn't think because of lack of they were hesitant to communicate with me, and it could be from language, but also it could be lack of encouragement to speak to other people from work. I was the only Black person, but sometimes when I was the only Black person, I was not the only Muslim person as well. When it comes to issues of prayer, and I know we do pray and we take time off on Fridays, but other days we do pray in the site. And sometimes some people are not familiar with seeing Muslims praying, and there's not always a designated place. But I sometimes find it myself, and some people are not aware of what I'm doing, and I have to explain to them as well. When it comes to like managers, and they were not pleased for me to take time off because they are on a deadline. But obviously, and because I was in demand, and they could not sack me or anything, and for that reason, and they let me take my time off. I would say everything starts from the top, and the people on top needs to be more open and speak with other people and how they are, their well-being, their needs and requirements, and not just dictate to them and what they need to do.
When I start in the site construction, after 3 months, the supervisor start to bullying me with a small touch, and I try to push him to tell to him it's not normal because someone can see me or see him, and I take it a red warning, and I don't want to lose the job because I'm single mother with 2 children here. And he tell me I don't care because I'm a supervisor. I'm gonna do what I want to do. And the same day after day. In November was the big episode. He approached me from behind. He put his hand here, and with another hand he touched me down, but outside the cloth, no inside. And there I put stop. And I was very lucky because the day after, the person called me on the phone and he asked me, it's okay in the site construction, how is the job? When he asked me on the phone, I tell, listen, it's not okay because I tried to stop this person, but alone I can do it. I need help. And from there, he helped me. The first, I speak with another woman because I feel more confident with the woman, and I explain her all the situation, and she do a report to the person who call me every month. And after the supervisor was kick him out from the site, was removed. For example, if someone go to her today and tell, listen, I want to do this with you, or he tried to touch her, she need to speak quickly, to don't wait like me 1 month, 2 months, because day after day, the problem gonna be bigger and bigger and bigger. If it's happened today you need to report the problem. Not tomorrow, not in 2-3 months, today. But if I have the possibility, I'm gonna help all the women in the site construction. From this reason, in the future, I want to be a supervisor, welfare, or doesn't matter, but I want to be next to the woman, to give courage to speak, because like a mother single and with all this problem with this supervisor, I feel more strong.
Well, that's some fairly harrowing testimony there about on-site behaviours experienced by 3 graduates of Transport for London's Construction Skills Programme. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Voice of Authority webinar, brought to you today by the London Construction Programme. My name is Toby Fox, and I work to keep a network of councils and developers and investors and their influencers and advisors connected. And one of the ways I do that is through this online channel, the Voice of Authority. It's a platform for councils to discuss their ambitions and challenges and influences and issues of urgency. And in all the pressing issues that we're facing right now, the role of construction has never been more critical. The sector generates 6% of the country's economic output, or £116 billion a year, and employs about 2.3 million people, or 7% of the working population. And it offers rewarding and varied career choices, from traditional trade-based specialisms to roles in cutting-edge digital and environmental practices at the forefront of improvements in productivity and the drive for net zero. Yet the skills shortages that they experience and an aging workforce are crippling the industry's ability to grow. And our opening video demonstrates the inescapable reality that construction site workers are exposed to behaviours that would not be acceptable in any other working environment. Now, from a moral and indeed legal perspective, the traumatic and deeply personal effects of this behaviour can't be overlooked. But beyond that, the industry is scaring off a huge pool of potential recruits and perpetuating an already serious skills challenge. And we must respond if we want our school children to move into construction and the built environment and become the productive workforce of tomorrow. So over the next year, two major clients, the London Legacy Development Corporation and Transport for London and the London Construction Programme, are collaborating to demand better standards in diversity and inclusion when delivering their combined £1 billion of work. Billions of pounds, that should be, to help us understand the challenge they're responding to and how they're facing it and the implications for all contractors and suppliers in London and beyond. It's a pleasure to introduce to the Voice of Authority today, in alphabetical order, Lisa Bliss, who is Commercial Business Partner at the London Construction Programme, Laura Miller, who's Senior Strategy Manager for the Construction Skills at Transport for London, Paolo Nistri, who is Head of Inclusive Growth and Skills and Social Value at the London Legacy Development Corporation, and Ramel Wallace, who's co-founder and director of the social enterprise Serious About Youth. Now, make the most of the expertise assembled on your screens, viewers, in the usual way by firing your questions through the Q&A function, and we'll address as many of those as we can during the course of the conversation. And we welcome your observations in the chat as well. And we've got a few questions for you via the online survey function. You can contribute to the discussion just by answering those as they pop up onto your screens over the next hour. Now, let's get one of those going straight away in order to assess who's out there and where you fit into all of these issues. So we're going to start off by asking whether we feel the construction industry manages discrimination effectively. Now, while you're answering that, I'm going to turn to one of our panelists, Ramel, and just ask, Ramel, the testimonies that we've just heard, how representative are they of the industry, and how do you know?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Good to be here this morning, and thank you for that question. Those testimonies are very representative. I work with young people across London. One of the sectors that we particularly focus on trying to get young people into is the construction sector. As an organisation, we particularly trying to engage more diverse groups and more disadvantaged groups, particularly those from a BAME background, women, trying to get them into the construction. But we've had great success in working with organisations like LLDC and other contractors and other organisations to get young people into the sector. It's something that's very real. Even the work that we are doing with the London Legacy Development Corporation and TfL, it came out of real experiences of young people that we were working with, getting opportunities on construction sites, apprenticeship jobs, etc. But then what started to happen, there was a pattern that a number of them weren't staying. And this was initially us working with LLDC. And from them investigating it, it started begin to see that there was this with young people sustaining. So we did a project with them to actually work with young people to help them sustain their opportunities. And then it became apparent that actually it wasn't, just the factor of, young people just handing the work too hard or the early morning starts too early. There were actually some very real issues of discrimination, of feeling alienated, of not being made to feel welcome, of feeling like they weren't being taught on their apprenticeships that were making these young people not safe. So you know, those testimonies are unfortunately still very real, still very prevalent in the industry. Though I do believe there has been a lot of progress over the years, it's still a lot more to do. There's a long way to go still. And as you mentioned earlier, if we are thinking about the future of the industry, particularly, you know, with the skill shortage, with Brexit, with all of these issues affecting the supply of labour, we engage more diverse groups. We have to make the sector more attractive. And when young people and more diverse groups come into the sector, they have to feel welcome and feel like they're able to perform to the best of their ability. Otherwise, they're not going to stay. So it's very important.
Thanks, Ramel. Paolo, if it's so widespread, and our viewers are saying that that they don't feel the construction industry manages discrimination effectively, if this is so widespread, why haven't we heard more about it? Why isn't it more obvious?
Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity also participating in what I think is going to be a really interesting, very important webinar. I think reflecting on what Ramel said, who engages young people on a daily basis, I think that for the sector, really, part of the problem is that quantitatively speaking, we know we have a problem. We hear, you know, the harrowing stories and examples and experiences that we've just heard, and they are not in isolation, as we know. But actually, no one's ever surveyed a significant proportion of the construction workforce on this issue. And actually, the victims of discrimination often don't feel that they are able to speak up. Things can be passed off as banter, or they feel that they are actively threatened for speaking out. And you know, this is a hidden problem, and it's little wonder, therefore, that we struggle to bring in new blood to the industry, as Ramel talked about. You know, I think, Toby, in your introduction, you really hit the nail on the head when you said that these are behaviours that wouldn't be accepted in any other walk of life or sector. So really, it's imperative that we as an industry start to come together and take steps to address it. And I think, given the audience today, and as is so often the case, making and instilling these changes has to begin with the role that the client plays. And that's why client commissioning authorities, I feel, as the public sector, have a responsibility and are arguably best placed to take the first steps in trying to engender that long-term change at an industry level. And really, I'm hoping that out of today's discussion, some of the things that we'll talk about will show you that there are, with robust plans, if you like, in place across the LLDC, across TfL, with Serious About Youth, to try and get as much commitment from partners as employers to work with us on this critical work stream over the long term.
Thanks very much, Paolo. I want to dig in a little bit more into why this matters to the industry. But yeah. Ramel, you just wanted to respond.
Yeah, I just wanted to actually just raise a point. I'm just following on from what Paolo's saying. You know, one of the things that we've discussed very much in the work that we're doing together is that this is something that really can change. You know, we've seen the change that's happened in the industry in relation to health and safety. And, you know, we're kind of using that as like a kind of example or marker to show that, you know, real significant change can happen in the construction industry, happened in relation to health and safety. And, you know, we believe that if diversity and inclusion is in the same way, that actually real change can happen, and it's just as important.
Thanks, Ramel. We're going to draw that parallel between what's happening in health and safety and what's happening in diversity and inclusion. We're going to come back to that in a second. I want to come to Laura next, because we know that this is a kind of business environment we're talking about, and ultimately, whatever with the best will in the world, it's money that drives business. So, Laura, what's the kind of commercial drive behind this? Why does this matter?
Thanks, Toby, and afternoon, everyone. Great to be here today. I think it's because it absolutely makes sense. You know, we're an industry that's facing significant skill shortages, that's adding to our wage bills. You know, there's a productivity challenge. We are losing people because of Brexit, because of aging populations, as you mentioned, Toby. But more than that, you know, from a TfL property perspective, we want to make sure that everything we're doing in terms of developing the homes and properties that we're building, that we're actually reflecting London. And London is a diverse audience. You know, we'll be ignoring significant proportions of the population if we don't start to address this. And taking Ramel's point about, you know, obviously 30 odd years ago, health and safety wasn't taken as seriously as it is now, but we've been talking about this for a long time. You know, it's not new that we know that we need to get more diversity into our construction industry. But when you look at the statistics for diversity, take women as an example, you know, it hasn't really changed. It's fluctuated between 10 to 12% overall, but when you actually look on number of women on site, it's about 3%. I also think it comes down to actually the way we employ people in the construction industry. You know, it's very driven by labour only subcontracting. It goes subcontractor to subcontractors, things get missed. And so what we're trying to do as, you know, kind of major procurement bodies, major public sector procurement bodies, is actually seeing how we can go into the sites to start changing the conversation, changing behaviours and cultures, because it's the only way it's going to happen. You know, we know our developer partners and main contractors that we work with have great diversity inclusion policies and say the right things and are doing great things. But actually, when you come to a site, the idea is that they need to deliver that on time, they need the people to do it, and they need to do it to budget. They're not actually interested in whether or not we want to create better diversity and inclusion. So we need to actually start changing that attitude and that behaviour if we're going to see any difference, because there's been great initiatives trying to get people in. We run them ourselves. We've got a very successful construction skills program that's probably touched about 4,000 people over the last few years. But if it's all going to be pointless if we can't start to address culture, behaviours and attitudes on site that pass off banter as standard practice, when, as we said, it really shouldn't be, and it isn't in any other industry. We shouldn't be any different.
Thank you. And what's at risk for suppliers and subcontractors who are watching, and what sort of value of procurement are we talking about being subject to new ways of assessing D&I?
Oh, well, I mean, it is billions when you consider the pipelines of LLDC, TfL, you know, of the local authority partners that are starting to take this very seriously. And we've built it into our procurement now. You know, a D&I is an important aspect of the way we look at the partners that we want to work with, because we want to work with partners that share our values, and we're going to then embed that in the supply chain as well. And we monitor it closely. So we have D&I and this is not to say it's just about putting targets in, it's about actually ways of working and how we support our industry to make this change as well. But I think if you're not doing it now, you're going to be questioned as to why you're not taking this seriously, because it's a very important matter that we all need to come together to challenge.
Thanks, Laura. Paolo.
Hi. Actually, thank you, Toby. Laura, I was about to add something, and then Laura said it right at the end. I think you know, we've commissioned significant amounts of construction work at the park, and we have had diversity and inclusion and equality targets in there, but they are sort of, you know, quantitative metrics around groups that are traditionally underrepresented in all sectors, but, you know, for the purposes of this conversation, construction. And I think, as Laura touched on, now really, if we want to engender some sort of significant systemic and sectoral change, we need to be looking beyond that and looking at the ways that we are doing it. And, you know, some of the things hopefully that we'll talk about today will demonstrate that there are plans afoot to do that.
Yeah, we'll have a chat about those initiatives in depth in just a second. But first, Lisa, I know you wanted to sort of draw some parallels with the webinars we've had before and your own initiatives on mental health.
Yeah, okay. So great to be a part of this panel. I'm really excited to be part of this on an ongoing basis. So thanks for you guys for joining the LCP and the Voice of Authority this morning. I've sat here and listened to you all talk, and literally, you know, I'm thinking, right, I'm going to say that. And, you know, you guys have touched on nearly every point. From an LCP perspective, yes, earlier this year, we did a Voice of Authority tackling mental health and the impacts of that, and, you know, the really important statistics of actually representation around people committing suicide and how that has impacted the industry, and touched on the fact that actually mental health has really not been high enough up on the agenda. And I see D&I as being in the same level of importance as that. And So what we've been doing since that virtual seminar was partnering with Mates in Mind, and we're really excited about the future, because we're starting to look at how we're going to tackle mental health, and actually how we're going to be building that into our future procurement. And then actually not just actually making it part of the assessment criteria, but how do we actually effectively monitor and make sure that what people are saying they're doing as part of their tender submissions are actually being delivered on site. And I see this as high up on that agenda from my perspective. And so really kind of looking forward to working with Laura, Paolo and Romel in the future about how we can not just make this a tick box exercise, that actually we can build D&I into our contractual relationship with our contractors, and any procurements then, but thereby going through the LCP framework or the procurement platforms becomes a part of this forms part of the contract that our contractors have to work to and deliver on an ongoing basis.
And what's the value of that programme to the industry, Lisa, roughly?
The value in terms of
the work that's going through your frameworks?
Well, at the moment, I mean, it's millions. You know, I wouldn't like to look at the, you know, and put a figure on it, but we are talking about millions and millions of pounds here. You know, we're partnering with 54 public sector organisations, all looking to put through their, hopefully work with the LCP and, you know, commission their construction related works and services through the LCP's procurement platform. So, you know, it is really, really important. And Laura, Paolo and Romel have all touched on it, is, you know, the construction sector have to come on this journey with us. They have to be part of this. They have to be ready to work with us as commission authorities to actually make sure, you know, we look at equality and diversity policies all day long when we're reviewing procurement and tenders. But actually, how we actually manage it and making sure that those practices that they say they're going to do on paper are actually being delivered on site. And that's the bit that I'm really keen to push forward.
Great stuff. Well, let's dig into that, exactly that now. We're going to talk a bit about the initiatives that that you've all experienced and put into place with employers and with young people, and we're going to understand, you know, what's actually happening and what sort of impacts have come from it. So, Paolo, can you just take us a little bit through the client side, you know, the journey that LLDC has gone through on procurement and how that's changed, and then Romel will come to you shortly.
Yeah, I mean, certainly since that we took over sort of stewardship of the park in 2012, we've commissioned, as you know, Laura touched on before, billions of pounds worth of construction and other works. And, you know, within that, we have really sought to use our commissioning power to you know, create the framework for delivering significant social value benefits, you know, and that can extend into you know, apprenticeships, education benefits, supporting people into jobs and training, etc., you know, local business benefits and so on. And really, I think that has been, as it probably is for many public sector organisations that are on this call today and elsewhere, a very iterative sort of learning process for us. And with, you know, I think with particular regards to some of the things that we're touching on today around D&I and young people, we began to sort of realise over a fairly significant amount of time that some of the apprentices that were starting their qualifications on the park, and I should sort of point out, we've had about 500 apprentices work at the park since the end of game. So there's, you know, sort of 40 or 50 apprentices a year going through. So it's a significant amount. But we began to realise sort of anecdotally that apprentices who are often from Black and global majority backgrounds were starting their qualifications but dropping out after 5 or 6 months. And actually, when we started to dig in a little bit deeper, and this was work that we did and was led by Romel, it became clear that in many cases this was due to behaviours that these young people were experiencing on the shop floor, in inverted commas. And, you know, for example, we had young people going into gangs of steel fixers or dry liners where they were being discriminated against in a lot of different ways, from, you know, facing sort of very disturbing outward hostility all the way down to sort of things like being linguistically excluded from their group. And I think for me, these sort of lessons and these examples are why it's so critical that diversity and inclusion, and particularly the programme that we're developing with Ramel, is picked up by commissioning authorities, main contractors and developers, but is particularly focused on supply chain subcontractors, because quite frankly, that is where the issue is most prevalent. You know, Laura mentioned earlier that in the majority of cases, if you take leading high profile developers and main contractors, they have fit for purpose, shiny, resplendent diversity policies, and that's all right and proper. But it's down into the tiered supply chain that this work really needs to be targeted. And actually that is reflected of how the industry is organized as well. I think it was Ramel earlier on that touched on, you know, the high levels of subcontracting, the short work programs, etc. We need to be reflective of that when we're targeting our own D&I work. And it's that basis, on that basis rather, that we're collaborating with Serious About Youth and TfL to sort of try and address these D&I standards through procurement and embed the ways of working that we hope will allow us to generate critical mass, so that these acceptable behaviours are embedded right across the sector, but particularly across sites and down into a supply chain level. So certainly we're, I saw a question in the chat to sort of our public sector viewers that somebody put up. You know, we want to certainly embed these standards through our procurement so they become formal deliverables across all of our sites in East London, London, and eventually beyond, because I think that's the first step as a commissioning authority that we have. That's the power we hold.
Fantastic. Thanks, Paolo. So Laura, how do you make these things not just tick boxes? How do you make sure this program really has an impact? And I guess we got a viewer, Caddy S, who's pointing out that the fact that those graduates we heard from in the first place are attracted into the industry is great. You know, they're both from different backgrounds. It's really positive. It's the behaviours that affect them are the behaviours once they're in place on site. So how can a procuring body have any way of monitoring and impacting that day-to-day experience?
No, absolutely. And that's actually why we set up our construction skills program, because we knew they would be creating thousands of opportunities across London. You know, we're building 20,000 homes plus offices and various other things, not even to mention our retrofit program. We wanted to create a program where we were attracting people to the industry, you know, showing them actually there are so many different possibilities. There is a journey for everyone. But then we are also working with our main contractors, developer partners, and supply chain on the ground as well. So we have teams that are on our sites, you know, week by week, working with the supply chain, understanding actually some of their requirements, showing them the benefits of actually a diverse audiences, the diversity inclusion thing. Getting diverse inclusion candidates in as well, but more than that, it's showing them this isn't just about tick boxing and tokenism. It's actually about trying to create a better industry for everyone. You know, what we talk about is inclusion, and that's around fairness, inclusion, and respect as well. Obviously, some people may be aware of the work that CITB and the Supply Chain School do around the FAIR framework, and it's trying to kind of get to the heart of that and kind of get it to the ground, but also make it very practical and realistic for, as we say, that the supply chain that are often may only be on site for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months at a time, and maybe very, very small businesses without HR functions and various things, and not know how to do these things. So for us, it's, you know, it's much about the education and the learning to understand why this is important, as much as it is about putting things into procurement. Taking the, you know, one of the case studies you heard, that's just one of several that we've heard about through our program. As I say, between the construction skills and built environment over the last few years, working with our training partner, the Skills Centre, through our on-site construction hubs, we've touched over 4,000 people in some way, shape, or form through engagement training, getting them into work. You know, we've placed over 1,500 people into work in the last couple of years, despite COVID. So we've got all the right ideas getting people in, but this initiative that we're working with LODC and Serious About Youth is about actually making sure that we retain them, because that's the biggest thing for us. It all becomes pointless if we don't put that working on the ground. We don't invest actually in terms of the support and the guidance and the on the ground information, advice, and guidance that our teams can provide to make this work. You know, we want people to go on our construction sites and realize that diversity included is important as health and safety through the comms program that we're doing, as well as some of the very tangible training and ambassadorial programs that we're looking to put in place. And that's the only way it works. It's not a, we can't just do one thing in isolation. We can't do this in isolation. And it's also not trying to reinvent the wheel either, because there has been some good things that are happening, and we're just trying to take all of that and look at what works best to start to actually make a change. As I was saying, one of the case studies you heard was a lady who was very bravely come forward. The only reason that she was able to deal with that matter was because one of our construction skills managers called her up to see how she was getting on. Otherwise, she wouldn't have known what to do. It was her supervisor. Who do you go to when your supervisor is the one that's sexually harassing and assaulting you? As a woman working in this industry as well, I hate to think that is the environment that we're in, that is just the day-to-day lives of many other women that try to experience this sector. So yeah, I mean, as I said, it's not just one thing we need to do in isolation. It's lots of different things, but we need to move away from talking about it just as tick boxes and targets, because it has to be so much more than that.
Thanks, Laura. And viewers, in the private sector initially, we're asking in the chat if you have initiatives or actions that you or your employer are taking to improve diversity in the workforce and in the supply chain. We'd be really interested in what you put in the chat there. And let's turn to Ramel. Ramel, can you paint us a picture of what this program actually involves and how it's being implemented?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things that I think is really unique and hopefully will be very effective about this program is it's not just targeting management or tier 1 contractors. It actually is trying to engage operatives on the shop floor, so to speak, as well as the different sizes, all the way down to the small tier 2, tier 3 contractors as well. So, we've developed a range of different ways of trying to engage everybody on site. And one of the things that we're looking at is developing an induction video so that everybody inducted to the site sees this video and understands how important diversity and inclusion is, and understands the benefits of it. That diversity and inclusion is not just an ethical thing to do. It has business positive impacts on business, as far as the performance of staff, the well-being of staff, as Lisa's talked about, as far as mental health. We're also aware of the high suicide rates in the industry. Taking this kind of issues seriously impacts all of these different things, as well as the reputation and the future business of the contract themselves. Because the more that this does become part of procurement and contracts and targets, being able to give examples of how they've addressed diversity and inclusion effectively will actually help the businesses in the future, as well as when it comes to profits, winning more jobs and that type of thing. So it's not just a nice to do thing. So the induction video is one way so that everybody inducted to sites will get that. We're also looking to develop and deliver toolbox talks, a range of toolbox talks are delivered consistently, periodically. So there's a consistent reminder and message about diversity and inclusion, and developing the knowledge and the understanding of diversity and inclusion, and what is acceptable behaviour, what is not acceptable behaviour, how to deal with this behaviour if you see it or experience it, those types of things, so that messaging is consistent. Again, a bit like health and safety, the way that health is, reinforced on a very basis. Also looking to develop training for supervisors and managers to make sure that they very much understand the important role that they play in leading by example, as well as being part of the reporting process. And then also delivering training to help develop the understanding and the benchmark best practice for the HR teams of the contract, smaller ones, the tier 2, tier 3 contractors. As mentioned, some of these organizations don't necessarily even have HR departments as such. So really kind of benchmarking and trying to give them knowledge on how these situations should be dealt with effectively, so that hopefully there's more consistency in how these organizations are dealing with it. Because the truth is, from the experiences that we had in getting to this point, developing this the way that different contractors dealt with some of the incidents did begin to get reported, started to engage the subject more. It varied very much, and there were times when the person reporting it often came out looking or looking, feeling and experiencing like they came out worse out of the situation. And obviously that is not acceptable, has to change. So it's really important that contractors know how to deal with this more effectively. Then I think one of the questions was, how do the procurement partners kind of monitor this? And this is a big part of the conversation that we've been having with LLDC and TVoA as well, you know, because them actually has the client, they have a lot of influence, you know, and if they, and the more that they're involved in these situations, and all the contractors on site see that this is something that they're taking an active role in, and they have influence over how these situations are dealt with, and if they're not dealt with, it affects, you know, the potential of these contracts being recruited for future jobs, etc. Then, you know, it will start to create change. So, you know, we hope we're taking quite a holistic view to dealing with this issue, and hitting this issue on all of these various levels. It's the site supervisors and managers, the HR teams of the contractors, and the involvement of the clients. We think that will hopefully have strong influence on improving this issue.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ramel. Lisa, I want to come to you in a second and just ask you about how what you've just heard about TfL and LLDC's program, how that compares to the sorts of initiatives that are already in place amongst your members and clients, your experience across public and private sector. But Paolo, you just wanted to come back briefly.
Yeah, I just really quickly to just sort of follow on from something that Ramel said, which I think is of critical importance, and that we need to sort of think about, is actually, as it's the reporting process, as Ramel talked about, and how these things are picked up with and dealt with is, you know, of incredible importance. And one of the reasons that is so important is that as we become a better industry at managing diversity and inclusion and acceptable ways of working, it is inevitable that on that journey we will have an exponential growth in the number of cases that come to light, because these currently are situations and experiences that are swept under the carpet. So we need to accept, as commissioning authorities, as main contractors, as developers, supply chain subcontractors, that we have to put into place effective mechanisms for dealing with these issues as they arise, these incidents, and that we are going to see a spike in them as we sort of go through the journey to sort of being able to address them in the short to medium term. And I think that's an important sort of thing to consider.
Yeah, it's awful to contemplate, but we almost want that to happen, because we want to know that the program's being effective. We know that these behaviours are happening. You know, we know that there are victims out there who aren't being heard. So we want those numbers to increase. Lisa, so what programs are in place? You know, what initiatives are already part of the industry?
Well, before I touch on that, I just have been listening again, and you know, listening to everybody talk, and it actually makes me quite sad to think that these things are still going on in this day and age. You would have thought by now that we've come quite a distance from, you know, 30, 50 years ago, when these types of behaviour were almost acceptable, but it's obvious that it's not, and it feels for me like we've still got a long way to go in terms of addressing that. From a procurement perspective, and what I see in public sector is very much there's good intentions, and I'm going to speak freely, and those that have been on panels with me before will know that that's what I do. But I don't think we're good enough. I don't think that we are doing as much as we could do. You know, yes, we do ask for policies and we look at equality and diversity, but actually our job is to go a little bit further than that. For me, it's about actually making sure that, you know, what's being said, as I said earlier, is what we're doing in what's being said in these policies have actually been delivered on site. And I don't think that is happening. What I'm really, really excited about, though, with this scheme is that this is about dealing with prevention as well. It's about being able to signpost, being able to train and direct people that are experiencing these types of behaviours on site, and directing them to know what they can do if they come across some, you know, unacceptable behaviour. And that's why, for me, you know, I feel like actually procurement has a massive part to play in this. We as commissioning authorities, and me as a framework provider, can kind of work with our contractors, but not only just have, like, you know, it's a policy or a KPI. You know, this forms part of that social value element for me. You know, we're typically trying to, and I know I've kind of jumped from a little bit of a subject, but it's something that's just really passionate for me, is that social value is more than just a tick box exercise. Yeah, you know, we're looking at encouraging people into the workforce. We look at actually wanting, from a commissioning body, working with our local people. You know, if we're encouraging young people, local people into the sector, and they're not lasting more than 2 minutes, we're not actually doing the construction sector justice. We're not actually doing these people the service that they deserve in terms of when they're going into employment. And I think from an LCP perspective, you know, we can play a part in the future of procurement and driving these good practices that these groups of people and organisations are trying to bring to the forefront of the agenda. I mean, I don't know if I feel like I've waffled a little bit there, but and skipped in between like different you know, important points, but it just feels for me like we have a really important part to play, and I don't think procurement and commission authorities, whilst they have good intentions, are doing enough at the moment.
Okay, Lisa, thanks for that. So let's hear about what impact this program's having. Ramel, what are the results so far? How are you evaluating what you've been doing?
Well, so, you know, this is a pilot project, so, you know, this is something that is going to be delivered for the first time, but we did do a kind of initial pilot project last year with one of the sites. So this project that we're doing with LLDC and TfL is going to be across 6 sites, 3 LLDC sites or 3 TfL sites. But we initially started addressing this issue with LLDC last year, and we designed and delivered workshops that were to engage the operatives on one of their sites. And we engaged over 300 operatives on the site, delivered training to them about diversity and inclusion. For a lot of them, the first time they're really hearing about this issue and, you know, talking about these types of experiences. We had some very, you know, very interesting, some very honest conversations about what is acceptable and non-acceptable behaviour. You know, them understanding, for example, about the Equality Act, that this is a legal requirement, the 9 protected characteristics. This isn't just about race, ability, gender, sexuality, you know, a range of different that are important. So as far as the impact, I can say that we evaluated the training that we did last year. We had some, you know, really positive responses. Over 85% of the people that did the training said that they felt their knowledge of diversity and inclusion had improved. And I guess the one really important one is that over 90% felt more committed implementing, supporting more inclusive behaviour on site. And now that they came to a better understanding of what diversity and inclusion was, you know, what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable behaviour, and the impact it can really have on people. You know, it can have such a devastating impact on people's lives. And I think bringing that to the forefront, having these real honest conversations with the operative staff itself, I think did have an impact. But, you know, that was one-off training. That's why the program has now developed further, and it's something that we realize that there's an importance of being a consistent message. It has to be reinforced consistently, as well as if there are incidents that happen, it has to be real effective action taken. Obviously appropriate to the situation. Every situation is going to be different, but it has to be a willingness to, you know, really address these issues. Otherwise, it's just going to.
Thanks, Ramel. Okay, so Laura, you've tested this out on a site. You're now rolling it out on 3 more TfL and 3 more LLDC sites. What else needs to be done? How do you see this sort of rolling forward?
And it's all about the sustainability of it. So although this specific pilot is for 3 of our property development sites, Actually, it's how we're creating a suite of materials that we then can roll out on every project that we're doing. And we've been doing this not just as TfL, we do it in partnership with our major joint venture development partners as well. So it's actually a co-funded initiative from our perspective, and every single one of them is on board in how we take this further. You know, they all see it as such an important initiative that we are prioritizing, to the point that we take it to the most senior levels as well. So where we have our joint venture boards, you know, D&I is a standing item on the agenda, and where we are embedding this is that actually any cases of discrimination are taken to that forum, so we understand the extent of what's happening and also how it's being dealt with, so we know it's being dealt with effectively. And this is where the ambassadorial program will come into the most important part of this that we're doing, because one, people need to know where to turn when, you know, they are struggling, if it is their supervisors that's actually discrimination against them, you know, if it is they feel they don't have a voice on site, we need to give them a voice on site. And so building that ambassador program that would not just be, you know, our TfL and development partners, anyone that on that site that wants to get involved, is how we then start to take this forward for industry. And this isn't just for LLDC and TfL. We want to see very much how this can cascade across the sector, because that's the only way it's going to change. You know, as major commissioning authorities, we're going to be working with so many different partners in our supply chain over the course of our development program. So the more we can start to cascade this now, is the bigger impact it's going to have, and that's how it becomes sustainable. It is a learning process. You know, we've learned a lot since the pilot LLDC run. We're doing a lot of consultation now with our partners to make sure it's not just us doing this to industry. We want to do it in partnership with industry, because we recognise that's the only way it's going to work. And it is very much making sure, as I said, that it's about open and fairness for all, and people just know this isn't about tick boxing like we talked about last time.
Thanks, Laura. Paolo, how do you see this rolling out? What else needs to be done? And in particular, what other partners are you targeting for the programme, and how are you sort of bringing them into it?
I think, you know, Laura has touched on some of those things, and Ramel, I think, mentioned earlier on that really the ultimate aim is to make D&I as core to everything that the industry does, as health and safety was made in the 1990s. And I think, you know, for us, this training program is very much the first step in that journey. The way we want to do that, you know, I think much of it has already been articulated. We want commissioning authorities to set and drive standards beyond sort of it being a tick box exercise, as Laura said. We want employers, main contractors and developers to pick up this sort of training program and use it to influence their supply chain partners, their practices on site across different sites, so that we get a continuity and consistency in terms of D&I standards within the sector. I think the CITB play a crucial role. I think Laura mentioned earlier on the fairness, inclusion and respect agenda with the supply chain school, and that's great. I think this is a potentially helpful addition to complement that FIR agenda that allows us to really get into site level supply chain subcontractor engagements. And actually, we really want to sort of embed this into our training courses, our tickets, you know, the training programs that our core partners such as the Skills Centre deliver out of our training centre on the Olympic Park at Build East, so that actually every worker, regardless of where they are in their journey into or progressing through the industry, the moment that they step onto a site, they know what is expected of them, and they know what are acceptable or unacceptable ways of working. And I think, just like they do now with health and safety, in fact, you know, everybody knows about the 5-point PPE, etc. And it's only in that way that I think we'll really start to turn the tide and really turn young people back on to see what you said at the outset, Toby, what a rewarding and exciting sector this can be.
Thanks, Paolo. And I should mention you've referred to the park quite often. We're talking about the Olympic Park, aren't we?
Sorry, yes.
And LLDC.
Yeah.
We just in case
Yeah.
there are viewers that aren't aware of LLDC's remit. Paolo, can you just dig a little bit deeper into that? Because the big elephant in the room of all of this is it's all very well talking to the main contractors, but they only have actually a limited ability to influence what happens on site, because there are so many very small firms, often with all sorts of different sort of heritages and origins. And as Ramel pointed out, very rarely with an HR department. So in real practical terms, how do you get this program through to the teeming masses on construction sites?
Well, that's why it's targeted at effectively the, I suppose, the stages, if you like, of an operative's journey through a construction site and the package that they work, where we get the biggest sort of massing, the critical mass of workers. And actually, every single operative and worker on a construction site has to do a site induction, which is why Ramel's scoping an induction video that will effectively set out the requirements and standards that all operatives working on that site are expected to adhere to. But that isn't enough, because actually you do an induction on day one and then you can be working X number of months without ever having to go back and sort of refresh that. And that's why we've got the package of toolbox talks that everybody on this call knows are given on a regular basis. And that will enable us to sort of keep reinforcing the message, particularly, as Laura mentioned earlier, in terms of considering the sustainability angle. With a high level of churn of a workforce, if you're getting those toolbox talks out regularly, you're factoring in that sort of high level of churn of the workforce, and you're hitting, consistently and continuously volume and critical mass of workers on a particular site. And then I think the other one is the D&I ambassadors, which as we've sort of covered, is an absolutely fundamental one, because I think then you have a point person who can be sort of a responsible for any incidents that arise. They, in confidence, they can sort of speak to anybody who has been a victim or a witness to discrimination, and they know the process for sort of escalating those things. So all of those things, none of them can be done in isolation, one from the other, and that's what Ramel said at the start. It's got to be a holistic approach, so that you're targeting critical mass of workers all the way through the different stages of their time on site.
Fantastic, Paolo. Thanks a lot. We're coming to you in a second, Ramel. Laura, just quickly, where can viewers access all these materials? How do they access the program?
So we're obviously looking at that at the moment as the program develops. We're in the very early stages at the moment. We're looking to record the induction video over Christmas. So look out in the new year for further information, which we're happy to share. Likewise, there is information on the LLDC website, and we're going to be having it on the TFL website shortly too. So that would be a good point of call to find out a bit more about what's going on. And likewise, if you do want to get involved after today, between ourselves, Lisa, we're happy to have further discussions to see how we can work together.
Thanks, Laura. Ramel.
Yeah, just a little point I wanted to make, just in relation to the question you asked of how do we make really make it impact the contractors, all the ones. The reality is it has to be something that becomes mandatory for them to, like, if they want to, someone obviously commissions them to work on the site. If it affects them being commissioned, or winning a job, then they're gonna start making changes. So until we start really dealing with this issue and it actually hits contractors in the pocket, and it's unfortunate, no one really wants to see this happen, but that's the only way it's going to really make a change. If for individuals, if they realize that it's actually going to impact their jobs, they could actually lose their job because of this type of behavior. They could even be potentially prosecuted for, serious, discrimination or violations against other people. Then people will change their behavior, So it's a shame that sometimes that kind of, I guess as with most things, there's a kind of carrot and a stick kind of approach to it. But the reality is it has to become mandatory, it has to become a part of, if you want to work on this site as a contractor, have to implement, you know. And if,
a point well made, Ramel. I just want to ask, in the processes that you've gone through in piloting the project and in rolling it out on the next 6 sites, have you, this is a question from a viewer, have you identified any BAME-led contractors to be included within that research?
Yeah, for me, in all honesty, I don't think that has problems as effectively as it maybe could. That is a very good point, because, you know, who are the supply chain? You know, are more diverse contractors being used? That is a very important part of improving diversity and inclusion within the construction industry. Really good point. I think it's something that you know, for us to take and consider more about how that messaging, you know, becomes part of,
Thanks,
you know,
Ramel.
diversifying the supply chain. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Okay, Lisa, what are your intentions at LCP? You represent a whole bunch of local authorities and other public sector organisations procuring away for millions and millions and millions of pounds worth of construction. So how are you going to take this forward? What are your commitments?
Yeah, so all I can say is that I am really, really committed to actually working with the team on the panel today. I think it's really exciting, the work that they're doing already, and the good work that's already been done. And actually, I basically want to make this a fundamental part of the procurement process. Equality and diversity is already there. As I said earlier, I don't believe that we do enough about actually holding people to account for where, you know, incidents happen. I want to have a more robust type of reporting. So, you know, we talk about social value, we talk about KPIs on our framework. I don't want them just to be an arbitrary tick box and yes, no answer. So I would like to kind of work with the team to develop what the reporting functionality or the capabilities or the types of questions that we should be asking to make sure that the responses that we get back are something that's meaningful and that we can actually do something with. I also want to make sure that the people that are working on our sites feel empowered to be able to voice when they're experiencing these types of things on site. And working with this panel is a way I think that we can kind of come up with, they're already doing that, they're already kind of thinking about that, but working with me and advising me, what can I do to support you from a procurement perspective to actually make sure that everything we've spoken today actually comes into practice, especially through the contracts that are let and awarded via the London Construction Programme. And I'm sure that all of the commissioning authorities that are already partnering with the LCP are going to really, really welcome this as well. You know, we're already talking, and when, you know, my team already talking to our clients, telling them about the fact that we're working with TfL, LLDC, SAE on this initiative, and they're all really, really excited. So I know that this is something they're going to really, really appreciate, the LCP driving and taking forward. And I just hope that our contractors, because obviously we've got our major works contractors, but we've got a whole hundreds more that are on our dynamic purchasing systems that are actually going to come and join and be part of the process with us. Don't work against us on this, work with us so that we can really make an impact in the industry. And so Laura touched on it. If anybody does want to get in touch with me personally about this initiative, my email address is lisa.bliss@harrogate.gov.uk. Please do drop me an email, because I really, really would like to have further conversations and really make this not just a one-off conversation, that's something that we can really drive forward.
Thanks, Lisa. That seems like a perfect place to end, and it's probably the perfect time as well, because I think TfL's environmental sustainability measures have kicked in, and Laura's not allowed to use any more electricity. So that's our last word. Viewers, please join me in thanking our brilliant panel for sparing their time and sharing their knowledge and insights and experience with us today. Thank you to Laura Miller from Transport for London, and thank you to Paolo Nistri from the London Legacy Development Corporation, and thank you to Ramel Wallace from Serious About Youth, and thank you to Lisa Bliss, of course, at the London Construction Programme, both for your contribution to the conversation, but also for your support in making this whole event and series of events possible. But most of all, as always, viewers, thank you for tuning in again and gracing us with your attention and fueling the conversation with some questions as well. If there's anything left hanging, we'll circulate those questions to the panel in coming days, and you'll find their responses on our LinkedIn Members Club. Now, we're going to be back very soon on the 13th with a one-to-one interview with Alice Lester, MBE, who's Operational Director for Regeneration, Growth and Employment at the London Borough of Brent. So join us on Tuesday at 11 a.m. for that. You can sign up to watch in the chat now or at 3fox.co.uk. And we're going to be back in 2023 with a whole programme of new discussions and interviews in person as well as online. So more news about that soon. But in the meantime, from our wonderful panel from the London Construction Programme, from me, thank you and good afternoon.